Question more.
How do we amplify the voices speaking necessary truths in these strange times?
The corporate parasites in power today might think their control will continue forever.
Questioning, listening, learning.
To take on the brutal systems of privilege and power, eroding liberty and polluting our minds.
It strangles American politics. Question more.
I'm Lee Camp. The corporate parasites in power today might think their control will continue forever. Whether they're right or wrong, we have to keep fighting. Question more.
I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vintage, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Dore, filling in for my favorite patriot, Jesse Ventura. And today we discuss the ongoing events in Iran and the Department of Homeland Security's latest surveillance campaign.
The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Brigitte Santos. For our top story today, the House has approved a concurrent resolution limiting President Trump's ability to engage in war with Iran without congressional approval. But both chambers of Congress must confirm this bill for it to take effect. It now goes to the Republican-controlled Senate, where it is likely to die. Because the president is not required to sign a concurrent resolution, Republicans argue that the bill is non-binding. But legal questions about Congress's authority to direct the executive branch with this type of resolution are unresolved. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton responded to the Democrats' efforts in a tweet stating, quote, "The 1973 War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional and should be repealed." Republican Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, on the other hand, has expressed a different opinion on the issue. Take a listen.
The argument has been made that the use of authorization of force voted on in 2002 to go to war with Saddam Hussein and his government is justification for anything they want to do in Iraq today, including killing an Iranian general. I see no way in the world you could logically argue that an authorization to have war with Saddam Hussein has anything to do with having war with people currently in Iraq. I think we need to have a debate about the separation of powers.
Jimmy, it's good to see Congress pushing back against war, but this resolution is just symbolic. What's your response to this?
Well, of course it's symbolic because both parties are owned by the same donors, which is the military-industrial complex in Wall Street, which wants to see this happen. So that's, so what Trump is doing is what George Bush invented.
Symbolic. What's your response to this?
Well, of course it's symbolic because both parties are owned by the same donors, which is the military-industrial complex in Wall Street, which wants to see this happen. So
Powers.
Jimmy, it's good to see Congress pushing back against war, but this resolution is just symbolic. What's your response to this?
Well, of course it's symbolic because both parties are owned by the same donors, which is the military-industrial complex in Wall Street, which wants to see this happen. So that's, so what Trump is doing is what George Bush invented, which was called preemptive war, which means I'm going to attack you because you look like you're going to attack me later, which I thought Iraq had put an end to that kind of policy. But here it is back again. It's kind of amazing. You can't do that in real life. You can't just walk up to someone down the street and punch them and say, you look like you were going to hit me later. That's a war. That's an act of aggression. These are wars of aggression. Again, the United States is the terrorist in the Middle East, and we should get the hell out of there. And the Democrats are putting up phony resistance, Mick resistance, as they always have been since he became elected.
The War Powers Act was supposed to restore constitutional balance after the Vietnam War, but another type of resolution, the authorization for use of military force, has basically overwritten Congress's war-declaring authority by giving the president the ultimate power to fight any group that the U.S. designates a terrorist organization. Now, when it comes to Iran, Washington has done exactly that by declaring Tehran's government military forces, the Quds, as terrorists. This sets an incredibly dangerous precedent, Jimmy.
So that's amazing, right? To me, it is. To hear the United States labeling other officials and other governments that haven't attacked us as terrorists, right? And by the way, Soleimani was the #1 terrorist fighter. He was the #1 ISIS fighter. So, I mean, which is why he's beloved all over the Shia world. So, yeah, all we have to do, under the AUMF, all the president has to do, the State Department has to do, is declare anyone or any group a terrorist, and so now we can attack them, and now we don't have to get authorization from Congress. It's unconstitutional. It sounds like it should be unconstitutional. If it's not, it goes against exactly the spirit of the Constitution. Which is that Congress are the only people who are allowed to declare war. But now, because we've said, hey, anybody who's a terrorist, the president can go do war on them. It's a crazy situation. I think people are starting to see through it because it's Trump.
Yeah, and look, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, says that he saw no evidence that the Iranian general, whom was just assassinated by the U.S., posed an imminent threat to U.S. embassies as Trump had initially claimed. But Trump responded in a tweet stating that it doesn't really matter because of Soleimani's horrible past. Jimmy.
Of course it matters. We can't, what about our horrible past? We just invaded and killed everybody in the country next to them, and then in the country next to them, and we're currently occupying the country to the other side of them. And then we just dropped 26,000 bombs, and we ran out of bombs in the Middle East. So I can't. So I said this last week, but the beauty or the silver lining of the fact that Trump is doing this instead of another administration is that the Trump people are such transparent liars that everybody is onto them. And it's the problem isn't just the Republicans. The problem is every politician is owned by the same people, except for a very few.
Well, let's get to the other side, all right? So House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that Congress's lower chamber will now vote to repeal the 2002 Iraq authorization for use of military force, which authorized the war against Saddam Hussein's government. Now, this is not to be confused with the 2001 AUMF, which approved the war on those responsible for the September 11th terrorist attacks. That AUMF targeted al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but has been a blank check for endless wars ever since. Now, 3 presidents have used that 2001 AUMF to justify at least 41 operations in 19 countries by claiming that it also applies to associated forces of al-Qaeda and the Taliban, meaning terrorists. Now, one of those 3 presidents, of course, was a Democrat, President Barack Obama. And it wasn't until 2019, when we had Republican President Donald Trump in power, that the Democrat-controlled House voted in favor of repealing the 2001 AUMF. Of course, the Senate has not approved that repeal. Now, in addition to all this, Pelosi says she wants to see a new AUMF that covers all U.S. conflicts in the Middle East. None of this shows us that the Democrats are truly anti-war, Jimmy, just that they're anti-Trump's war at this moment.
That is exactly right, Brigida. When Barack Obama was doing the same thing in Libya, we took Libya, the most successful country on the continent, and we turned it into a failed state with slave markets in downtown. So that's what Barack Obama did. We did it along with the French and the British, and the way the news reports it all the time is like, hey, we're fighting terrorists, we're fighting ISIS. But then you find out ISIS coming from Libya, going through Turkey, going to Syria, and now they're our friends when they show up in Syria. It's amazing, right? Barack Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize, and he had a kill list. That's kind of amazing when you think about it. And no, Nancy Pelosi never had, she was asked directly, hey, when are you going to make the president come get authorization to do this kind of bombing? Does he need it for Libya? And she just said no. And the person said, well, are we in a dictatorship then? Which is what that is. If one person can decide to create war at his whim, that's pretty close to a dictatorship. And you're right. They didn't care when Barack Obama was doing it. Nobody cared. In fact, that's why, it's kind of strange that Barack Obama was never impeached, even when the Republicans had a majority, and he was so distasteful to their base. And I think the reason was because he was doing the bidding of their donors. Barack Obama did the bidding of the military-industrial complex. Barack Obama did the bidding of Wall Street, Big Pharma, health insurance. He opened the Arctic to drilling twice whenever Shell Oil asked them. There's fracking pipes all underneath this country because of Barack Obama's legislation. So, yeah, it's really funny to hear them now present. So that, again, another silver lining of Trump's presidency, just like I pointed out before his presidency, is that maybe people will start to pay attention to the horrible stuff our government is doing.
Absolutely, and we have social media now, which we didn't really have in 2001. Do you think it's at least good that we're having a public debate about the separation of powers when it comes to American conflicts?
Yes, because we haven't had one. You know what, and I really don't even know how serious this one is. When you turn on the news, I turned on CNN and I saw Chris Cuomo. He's all upset about this, and why doesn't Congress do their job and take this power to make war away from Trump? Again, where were you the last 8 years before Donald Trump? Where were you? They were nowhere. These people were silent, and what a lot of people on the left predicted, that one of the silver linings of Trump's presidency would be guys like Chris Cuomo would have to actually say something about Donald Trump's war making, and which he was just handed by Barack Obama, that I thought hopefully people in the mainstream press would stand up to our surveillance state. But instead, the Democrats give expanded spying powers to Donald Trump, and the media is silent. And Barack Obama put the left to sleep. And so now, after 3 years of Russiagate, which is what the Democrats did because they didn't want to admit that they're so repulsive to American voters that they lost to a political novice game show host. So after they did 3 years of Russiagate, and now that's over, and so finally people are starting to focus on the horrible stuff that Trump is doing, like having all these spying powers and having the ability to bomb whoever he feels like. So that, thank God, guys like Chris Cuomo finally realized that there's a thing called the War Powers Act, and we shouldn't just give the president the ability to bomb.
Now, the U.S. and Iran have not had an official way to talk directly to each other since 1980, when President Jimmy Carter cut off diplomatic and consular relations as part of the Tehran embassy hostage crisis. Since then, the U.S. and Iran have used a neutral third party to communicate. Switzerland and its embassy in Tehran have been the U.S.'s so-called protecting power in Iran. Now, on the reverse, Tehran has asked Pakistan to be its intermediary with the United States. So basically, anytime President Trump or his Iranian counterpart want to send each other messages about very important things like sanctions, the Iran nuclear deal, airstrikes, etc., they have to play a game of telephone by basically communicating through either the Swiss embassy in Tehran or the Pakistani embassy in Washington. Jimmy, no wonder the U.S. and Iran have so many problems.
Yes, I mean, this... you remember the George Bush policy is we're not going to even talk to you until you do some stuff we want you to do. No, that's not called a negotiation. They had all these preconditions for negotiations. The reason why all this stuff is happening is because the military-industrial complex, which owns our government, wants it to be like this, right? So think about all the money. $131 extra billion the Democrats voted to give a guy like Donald Trump, who they say is being controlled by by Vladimir Putin, right? So why would you give that guy $131 billion extra dollars and the ability to go bomb anybody in the world if you think he's doing it at the behest of one of our enemies of our country, a hostile state? So they obviously don't think that. So that's why this is such a bipartisan gangbang, right?
Yeah, and apparently there's no money in actual diplomacy. Now, in domestic news, the Department of Homeland Security has kicked off a new DNA collection program at 2 U.S. border locations. Federal Border Patrol agents are now collecting DNA samples from non-U.S. residents between the ages of 14 and 79 whom enter the country without authorization at the Canadian border near Detroit and the Eagle Passport in Southwest Texas. A DHS memo outlining the plan also says U.S. citizens and permanent residents with green cards could also be subject to DNA collection if detained. Jimmy, we sadly knew this day would come. What is your reaction to the DHS's new pilot program?
Oh, Brigitte, what could go wrong? I mean, the government has never been shown to use our private information against us. It's not like we prosecute journalists in this country. So what do I think about? I think this is, again, horrible. And, the fact that I don't even, it's sketchy on whether they even have the legal right to do this, because they've been trying to put this into law, having the border security take DNA samples. They tried to get it put in 2 years ago for visas. It didn't pass. And twice they tried to get it in. Just last week, another representative tried to get a bill to make sure we get DNA from immigrants, and it's not passing. So the fact that they're doing it, and the fact that they keep bringing up these bills to let ICE do that, kind of tells me that they don't think they have the ability to do it as it is right now. So yeah, this is a bad idea. I can't wait for all the unintended consequences from this, and I hope people start shouting about this, because I was looking up try to see some pushback to this policy. I don't see that much pushback to this policy right now, and so hopefully shows like this will bring it to the consciousness, and there will be some pushback.
And look, once these DNA samples are collected, they're then logged into the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains profiles from state and federal agencies, as well as information from forensics labs. This database is designed to link crimes to known offenders. And the data collected at the border would reportedly be held in this database indefinitely, forever. The 5-phase program is scheduled to continue over the next 3 years. And this is the scary part. The goal is to eventually extend the program to all U.S. border sites, and possibly, and most likely, to include all U.S. citizens. Those who refuse to submit a DNA swab could be charged with a criminal misdemeanor. Jimmy, this is insane.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was saying, right? So they're saying it's voluntary, but if you don't do it, you'll lose your kid, you'll get separated, you might be charged with a misdemeanor. Also, there was a Swiss paper, I think, that was written about this very sort of DNA testing, right, that happens right in the same presence on location, this kind of DNA testing. And they found out that 36% of the samples had leakage, which means that they weren't reliable. So what's the recourse? So that's almost 4 out of 10 if you round up, 36%. That's 4 out of 10 of those DNA tests came back contaminated and not reliable. So what's the remedy when a parent is separated from their child on a bogus DNA test that we know is likely to be bogus 4 out of 10 times? Also, this causes a lot of problems. For instance, let's say someone, because of poverty, they lose their father, and they have another, and also adoptions in poor families don't have a paper trail. So they could be splitting up actual families because they don't match a DNA, even if the DNA test is correct, right? Also, it's not uncommon for the father not to be the biological father of a kid he thinks he is. That's more common than people think. So again, there's lots of problems with this, not only the unreliable data testing, but they're going to also expand it to everybody. And of course, if they can do it to the whatever we do to people overseas, we're going to do it to ourselves at home, right? And so whatever we're going to do with our immigrants, we're eventually going to do to ourselves. This is a horrible idea.
It's time for a break. When we return, Jimmy sits down with security expert Nick Espinosa to talk about a new California privacy law that could protect consumers from corporate spying. We'll be right back.
Host of...
I'm Jesse Ventura. Station questionable. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Dore, sitting in for my favorite patriot, Jesse Ventura. And my guest is Nick Espinosa. He's an award-winning author, the host of a nationally syndicated radio show, and a founder of Security Fanatics. He joins me today from Chicago to talk about California's new privacy law and how it will affect all Americans. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. For those who don't know, what is the CCPA and when did it take effect and what will it do?
All right, so the CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. It actually took effect on January 1st, so it is live as of right now. And it does two basic things. It does one thing for the consumers, but it does another thing for the corporations that have to adhere to it. So if you are a resident of California, you now have the ability to go to any web or internet platform that you use. Most people think of Facebook and Google, but it does definitely affect other smaller platforms as well. And you have the ability to go to them and say, what information do you have on me? And you have also the right to have them delete it while having them not kick you off of their platform. So in other words, you can go to Facebook and say, show me the information you have on me, and then Facebook, please delete my information. And Facebook is supposed to do this and still allow you access to their service, even though you've opted out of data mining. Now, on the other side of this, for corporations, basically any company or corporation that caters to residents of California that has either over 50,000 followers or is $25 million in size or greater has to adhere to this law as well. And if they don't, there are fines and repercussions. And the state of California has made it a lot easier to sue these companies if they don't actually do what you say and delete your data.
Okay. So wait, so this doesn't apply to like Google, right? So like I can't get Google to take out a news story, right?
No, not necessarily take out a news story, but it's personal information basically that is on you. So as you sign into, let's say, your Google account where you get Gmail access or something like that, they have personally identifiable information on you, whether it's your name or username and password or other characteristics from, let's say, a mobile phone or your computer that track you and locate you. That is the specific information that we are talking about here.
Oh, okay. So now, is the law similar to the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation?
Yes, the GDPR in the EU is essentially the model for what California is trying to do, but the EU has the ability, because they are an organization that deals with nations around the globe, to actually have this be more wide in scope. So in other words, what the European Union is doing is basically saying, if you're an EU citizen, let's say living here in the United States, the general protection laws, the GDPR, then applies to you even if you are outside of the European Union. In this case, California has narrowed this scope so that it's only residents of California. So, for example, let's say you are from California and then you move here to Chicago, the state of Illinois, and become a resident here, you then lose the protection that California just enacted to give you.
Really? Wow. So under the new California law, can you tell me exactly what personal data is protected, and is there any data that isn't covered?
Yes, so basically anything that you can think of as personally identifiable information is essentially covered for the consumer. So as I mentioned, your name, your username, your password, personally identifiable information on you, such as, let's say, an IP address from your phone or identifiable entities within your phone or your computer. It also covers things like understanding if you're married, if you're a man or a woman, if you are a transgendered individual, what your orientation is, your religion, your marital status, and all of these things. Now, there's an interesting clause, though, in this, in that there are two things that corporations can do, not quite to get around this, but to still retain some of this information on you. The first one is that they don't necessarily have to delete it, but they have to basically make it anonymous. In other words, they have to separate all of those personal identifiables from you, basically separate it from your name. So in other words, let's say they know that you're married and they know your orientation and your religion, all of that. They can still keep that information, but now it can't be linked to you, it can't be tracked back to you, and they can do that for research purposes. The other thing that is covered, while they have to, if I go to them and say, hey, I'm a married individual, please remove from your website that I am married, they can actually go to public record, because obviously if I got married in the state of California, there's going to be a marriage license that they may be able to get. But they can't get that information from me. A Facebook or a Google would have to go into the state of California's public records and retrieve that information on me. So in other words, I can have them remove this, and if they take the extra step to make my information anonymous for research, or they go to the public record in the government for the state of California and get that information, they are allowed to retain that as well.
So do companies automatically stop collecting and monitoring California's online data, or do we have to tell them to stop?
No, we absolutely. Their model, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, they basically raise their revenue by data mining us to basically make their advertising a lot better for the people that would buy advertising. They are absolutely going to keep data mining you, me, everybody else until you explicitly go to them and say, what do you have? And please remove it from the system. So absolutely, if you are in the state of California and you want to be removed from Google or Facebook, you have to contact them. You have to contact them yourselves. You cannot expect them to do that for you. No way.
And so this applies to data they've already collected, right? That will be deleted?
Correct. So if you've been on Facebook, and a lot of people, as Facebook was blowing up in the early 2010s, started signing on, this is retroactive all the way back to day